Mr. Olguin?
Yes. I want to make sure that I address with the full board a few of the comments and exchanges I had during the recess, just to make sure that all these points come up. Interesting point came up about, well, when we were talking about board not instigating the superintendent, what does that mean? I mean, how far does instigation go? And it's like, well, rule of thumb, don't push it, right? And don't try it. But I suppose it could be something simple enough as in the middle of a board meeting, the board says to the superintendent, maybe you want to create a superintendent's committee on technology. Well, that would be kind of blatantly going out there suggesting, well, I wasn't, trying to instigate. It was just a suggestion. Don't push it. I mean, it should be something that naturally comes and develops out of the work that's being done by the superintendent's office. And again, if it goes to creating a perception, a bad perception, you don't want to give any cause to that. So don't push on the instigation. Don't try it. Don't do it.
So don't even mention it? Is that what you're saying?
Don't instigate. That's a requirement, that the board cannot instigate the creation of a superintendent's committee for the purpose of avoiding Brown Act requirements. Okay? Don't instigate to avoid for purpose of avoiding Brown Act requirements. If you're suggesting because you think it's a more effective way for the superintendent to deal with things, it has nothing to do with avoiding the Brown Act, then I suppose it's a fair enough suggestion. But if it's for purposes of avoiding the law and avoiding Brown Act, don't do it. Then let me see, what was another point that came up during the break? Mr. Carlino, we talked about...
We talked times for the emergency, or who they call
Oh, yes, thank you for reminding me. In terms of calling an emergency meeting, how much notice is required? You could call an emergency meeting on 1 hour's notice. Does that mean you could call it at 1 a.m.? Well, if it's that type of emergency, I suppose you could, as long as you complied with all of your emergency board meeting requirements. Let's see here. Closed session, litigation advice of counsel. A board may meet in closed session to confer with or receive advice from its legal counsel regarding pending litigation when discussion in open session would prejudice the position of the district in the litigation. So quite often, if there's an update on the case status, there needs to be direction on how does the board want to pursue. You couldn't possibly have those discussions in open public session because the opposing party could be there. The opposing party, if you're streaming your meeting, could be watching. So there's a purpose for having your closed session discussions with legal counsel. The board must either state on the agenda or publicly announce the authority for the closed session and, when known, the title of the case. So if someone has already filed a lawsuit against you, there's going to be, a case that's out there, Juan Sanchez versus Calexico Unified School District, case number C531759, whatever the case number is. So you would announce it, we're going into closed session because of that case.
That's only if it's filed. What if it's anticipated litigation?
If it's anticipated litigation, you don't have a case name yet, so you wouldn't be disclosing the case name. But sometimes there could be a tort claim that comes forward when the board has handled tort claims, and sometimes on a tort claim you're asked to approve or reject a tort claim that comes before you. You may want to get legal advice on that tort claim. So in terms of going into closed session on that, if you already know you've got your tort claim agendized, you would simply say, or state on your agenda or publicly announce that you're going into closed session to discuss the Sanchez tort claim. And that's it. That would be enough to provide notice to the public. Okay. Let's see. Closed session discussions are confidential. Note, no person may publicly disclose information that has been received and discussed in closed session concerning pending litigation or any other subject unless the information is authorized by law to be disclosed.
What happens if that happens? If that's violated?
What happens if that's violated?
What's
Well,
the repercussions? I guess?
the repercussions? Depending on the case, I don't know how that information will impact your case that's actually pending if it's a litigation that's disclosed. Certainly, it's a violation of the Brown Act. Boards do have the ability to publicly reprove whoever has done this. If it's a board member, some boards will take action to reprove them publicly. If it's an employee, there may be disciplinary action that could follow with an employee who discloses closed session information. Now, if improper items or improper topics are being discussed in closed session and someone discloses to the district attorney or the grand jury that improper topics were being disclosed in closed session, there's a privilege for them to do that because, first of all, those topics should not have been discussed in closed session, so they don't receive that protection. But also they receive protection for going forward and claiming that there has been that violation. So I just want to hit on those topics there.
If an individual board member discloses, is the entirety of the board legally liable for that disclosure?
No, but if there is a disclosure, the holder of the privilege is the board and any representative of the board. If we're talking about attorney-client privilege communication, let's say that we drafted an opinion letter to the board. It's a confidential attorney-client privilege letter. The information in there was intended to be confidential. Only the board could authorize its disclosure by majority vote. Okay? If one board member chooses to send this letter to the media, that person has attempted to breach the attorney-client privilege, but doesn't have the authority to waive the privilege. If this information becomes known to the board should immediately take steps to indicate that there was never an intent to waive the privilege. But once you ring that bell, once that information is out there, how do you get that back? Okay? Similarly, if the information were to become known to the superintendent that some item has been disclosed, a communication has been disclosed, the superintendent, as a representative of the board, is authorized to assert that privilege on behalf of the board. So if the superintendent finds out that the media has a copy of an attorney-client privilege letter, the superintendent can tell the media, sorry, you have to give that back to us. We have not waived the disclosure of that. The board hasn't waived that. That's not properly, you should not properly have that. And I don't know if at that point, if we really wanted that document back, that we would go through the legal channels of having a court force the media to give that letter back to us. The third person who can assert it is always the attorney who has written that communication on behalf of the board. We will take that to our grave, essentially, to protect your privilege unless we have been authorized by the board to disclose it. So that's a little bit on closed session and also attorney-client privilege issues. Let's see. Closed session for labor negotiators. A board may meet in closed session with its designated representative regarding salaries, salary schedules, fringe benefits, or any other matter within the scope of representation for represented and unrepresented employees. Represented employees means union members. Unrepresented could be your confidential staff, your managers, your senior level administrators. Okay? You can meet in closed session regarding salaries. You can actually, not to confuse this with taking action on approving salaries for senior level administrators. You couldn't take that action in closed session. All of that action has to take place in open public session. Okay? Closed sessions for labor negotiations may include discussion of an agency's available funds and funding priorities. That means that if you're in closed session and you're trying to figure out, whether there's the ability or desire to provide an increase in salaries, you can ask that the budget be brought in and explained so that you understand what the budget or how the budget stands in order to make a proposal that would include an increase. Closed sessions for labor negotiations shall not include final action on the proposed compensation of any employees. Again, that's the point. You don't take action on the final compensation for any employees. That action, you do it in open session.
But that doesn't stop you from discussing it.
Correct, because it could be part of the negotiation strategies. To give you an example, when negotiating salary and benefits, that's a total compensation cost. So you're probably trying to figure out in closed session, do we want to propose, instead of a 2% salary increase, that we simply take the equivalent of that money to increase the cap on health benefits. And then you just have that discussion, you gain that information, you think it through, and then when you come out to open session, in open session you will then decide to approve the action that you wish to have taken. Okay?
So would any labor, whether it be certificate or classified, do the same thing?
Yes.
Discuss it in closed session?
Yes.
When you take action on it, it has to be in open session?
Yes. But also remember the difference too, that if you're meeting in closed session to discuss and you're giving direction to your labor negotiators, there's no action taken. You're just providing direction to your negotiators. You're not going to go out and say, we've given authorization to our negotiators to go up to 3%. When they go back, they're only proposing 1.5% plus an increase on health and welfare benefits. I mean, that's giving up your position.
So that's the final action?
Right. The final action, yes.
Yes or no?
Is in open session.
Open session.
Yes. All right. Employment contracts, and I've discussed this already, but it's worth reviewing, and you may want to highlight. Government Code 53-262, all contracts of employment with a superintendent, deputy sup, assistant sup, associate sup, all these people, shall be ratified in an open session of the governing body, which shall be reflected in the governing body's minutes. Right? So all contracts of employment have to be reflected in your minutes. Why is that? That's, again, transparency. The public should know. And if it's reflected in your minutes, it should also be part of your agenda. So don't try to hide those things away from your agenda. Make sure it's reflected in there. Pursuant to 53-252B, copies of any contracts of employment, as well as copies of settlement agreements, shall be available to the public upon request. That means if you approve a contract in open session, that contract was part of your backup materials, that contract is a public document. If the contract was negotiated over the weekend and then brought in for your consideration the day of the meeting, because we couldn't get it in the package, and it's approved at that meeting, and a member of the public requested, as promptly as possible, a copy of that contract shall be provided to the public. The same thing with settlement agreements. Any settlement agreements, even if it's a settlement with respect to a pending piece of litigation that's finally approved by the board, shall be made available to the public upon request. Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
Now, you say the copy of the contract shall be open to the public. Copies of employment, contract of employment, copy of
All contracts of employment.
I'm sorry. Now, does that include salary?
Yes.
Salary.
Yes. Yes. Notice how this list includes your senior level folks. It doesn't include the rank and file, staff members, teachers. So it's your superintendent, deputy sups, right? Okay. Again, it's the whole city of Bell. We want to know what our high level administrators or officers are receiving in terms of compensation. Okay. The question now is how far is the law willing to go into what individual employees' staff members are actually making. Is there some public right or public interest to know what individual employees who are not senior levels are making? So the courts are still out there deciding those questions or issues when they come up. Real property transaction, again, you may meet in closed session on real property transaction. The board must identify the real property at issue and the person with whom the negotiator may negotiate. Student discipline, here are the ed codes that allow you to meet in closed session with respect to student discipline. Other authority for closed session. Districts which are members of a joint powers agency formed for the purpose of ensuring a pool may meet in closed session to discuss a claim for the payment of a tort liability or loss. Again, that's dealing with the tort claim. Considerary of honorary degrees or gifts from a donor who wants to remain anonymous. You know, if someone wants to make an anonymous contribution. Discussion of the legislative body of a local agency that has received a confidential final draft audit report from the Bureau of State Audits. So if you're wanting to review a draft of an audit, you can do that in closed session. So these are some of the nuanced areas where there might be, not often, but there might be. Safe harbor agenda descriptions. Again, the Act requires a brief, general description of each item of business to be transacted, including items to be discussed in closed session. That's your agenda requirement. So if you're going to meet in closed session, explain what that is. I pointed out with the safe harbor language. So when you're building the agenda, you try to use the safe harbor language for your closed session items. Examples of safe harbor language on the agendas. Here's slide 55. Conference with real property. You would identify that information. Conference with legal counsel, the name of the case or case number. So these are just some examples of how that language would appear. Prior to closed session, the board must disclose in open session the items to be discussed in closed session. So that's either you disclose it by way of it appearing on your agenda, or if your agenda didn't have enough information, there will be the announcement that can either repeat all of the information already stated in the agenda, or it may simply refer to the items as they are listed on the agenda by number or letter.
But you did state in the previous, going back to the previous page, you did state that if it's pending or possible litigation, we don't have to disclose it, right?
The noticing requirement is different. Okay? If you know the case, you state the case name. If it's pending litigation or potential litigation, you don't know the case, but you still list one case.
Okay.
Or you still list two cases, but you don't have information about who, you don't know who the plaintiff is, you don't, or the defendant. Maybe you want to initiate litigation.
Okay.
And so those nuances are specific to making sure if there's an actual lawsuit pending, the public needs to know you're talking about that pending lawsuit. If there's potential litigation where it's only a tort claim or the lawsuit hasn't been filed or you haven't filed your own lawsuit, then at least indicate the number of cases you will be discussing. Okay? After closed session, the board must reconvene in open session prior to adjournment. So you can't adjourn your meeting at the end of closed session and not come out. You have to come back out, open up in closed session, because the public has a right to know, did you take any action in closed session? And so when you come out, you will report any action taken in closed session, including the vote or abstention of every member that was present. Now, question. If an item was considered in closed session for action, and there was a motion and a vote and no approval for the action, did the board take action, yes or no?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me give the example. Let's say it's a settlement that is being proposed for the board to approve. Motion to approve the settlement agreement. The board votes all 5 against it. Was there action to approve the settlement? No, there's no action to approve the settlement. The settlement didn't get action to be approved. So do you report anything out? No.
Reportable action.
No action was taken. We didn't take action to approve. So keep that in mind, because you do approve, if there was a majority of the vote to approve that settlement, you would report out in closed session by a vote of 3-2, the board approved the settlement agreement. That was the action taken. When you walked into the closed session, there was no settlement. You walked out, there's still no settlement, so no action was taken. Okay? I mean, it's one of those technical things about reporting your actions. So just, some boards will report out even when there isn't action, but it just seems strange at times. So.
We've done it both ways.
So what do we say, just no report of action
I would advise, you took no action, so there's nothing to report.
to report?
Yeah. No action was taken in closed session. And then if that's all the business that you're handling, then the next thing would be someone makes a motion for adjournment.
I've got a question. For the sake of not expending too much of the district's money, we've cut off recording when we go into closed session. Are we not doing our duty by recording the report out?
Oh, you should, well, that's a good point. No, nothing obligates you to record your meetings. The only thing you're obligated to do is to prepare minutes of the actions taken by the board. Okay? Nothing requires you to transmit your board meeting. So as long as you make sure that when you come out of closed session, you are complying with the reporting out obligations, that you also make sure that when you approve the minutes for the meeting, that there is a component in there that says, report out of closed session, report no action taken. Then that's all you're required to do, okay? Good question.
Maybe attach that, or somewhere where we have the recording online, have a summary of whatever the board reported out of closed
Right.
session. Good.
Right.
Thank you.
Let's see. Yeah, approval given, and here's some of the reports. So, approval given to a settlement of pending litigation shall be reported after the settlement is final. What does that mean? Okay, if we come to you, the board, and say, board, here's a proposed settlement. We think the other side will accept it. You approve it. Is that settlement final? No. So there's nothing to report, because the other side could still reject it. Okay? If we walked in and said, board, we have a signed settlement agreement that is being presented to you for consideration. Do you wish to approve it? And you do. Once you approve it, is that settlement final? Yes. So then you'd have to report out that in closed session, the board approved entering into a settlement agreement with Jane Doe, or whatever the person's name is. But when we do enter into those settlement agreements, we should disclose out the principal terms of the settlement. So if we are making a financial obligation or financial payment on that settlement agreement, we should disclose it. If there's a specific term or time limit that it pertains to, we should disclose those major terms or concepts of that agreement. And again, remember that if a member of the public would then request to have a copy of that settlement, you can provide it. There is a wrinkle that if you approve it before they sign, right? There's no action taken, nothing to report. It's transmitted to the other party and then they sign it. There's no obligation to report anything after they sign it, unless it's requested by a member of the public to be reported out. So, don't know why that, nuance exists. But sometimes in our advice to clients, we say, look, nothing says you can't report it, and so if you want to at a subsequent meeting, you can go ahead and report it. So, just one of those little technicalities. Action taken to appoint, employ, dismiss, accept the resignation of, or otherwise affect the employment status of a public employee shall be reported to the public at a meeting in which the closed session is held. The report must identify the title of the position. However, the report of a dismissal or the non-renewal of an employment contract shall be deferred until the first public meeting following the exhaustion of administrative remedies, if any. That means a recommendation may come to you to dismiss an employee, but at that meeting you don't report that the employee has been dismissed. Why not? Because the employee is entitled to request a hearing before that becomes final. It would be premature for you to make that report. You wouldn't report that out until the first public meeting after they have exhausted all of their administrative remedies. Okay? Just to think, I had a case where the employee, the decision wasn't rendered for about 2.5 years after the incident occurred. But the employee then appealed it, filed a writ, and then appealed it to a court of appeal that sustained the dismissal. So here we are finally making the report 4 years after the incident when the board approved issuing the notice. So those are just some of those technical nuances that do come up. Enforcement, and we're almost done here. The enforcement of the Brown Act. First, I would tell you, the first enforcers of the Brown Act are yourselves. You as the board, as your own individual board member, have to self-police yourself, your own actions, your own conduct. And then together as a board, you all must police yourself and your conduct as a board so that you can be above reproach, so that there's no perception of any misconduct or violations by the public. So any member who attends a meeting of the board where action is taken in violation of any provision of the Act, and where the member intends to deprive the public of information to which the member knows or has reason to know of the public is entitled, is guilty of a misdemeanor. 54-959. So this means if you intentionally take action, right, you do so with the intent to deprive the public knowing of what you've done, you're guilty of that misdemeanor. Action taken is defined to include collective commitment. That means, enough of you agree outside of a board meeting that you'll agree to do some things in violation of the Brown Act. That could be sufficiency. Mere deliberation of some action will not trigger the criminal penalty. It's the collective commitment. We are committed to doing this. It's not just we discussed it. Okay. Good faith reliance on opinion of counsel that a closed meeting is proper would preclude a finding of wrongful intent to deprive the public of information. That means if there's some question, if you think that you should properly be within closed session and you tried to receive legal advice on whether to be in closed session and you relied on it, even if you're wrong, it would cut in your favor because you didn't have the intent to deprive. You tried to get an opinion, you tried to get an advice on it. A person may not disclose confidential information acquired in closed session. An agency may not take any action, nor shall it be deemed a violation for a person to make a confidential report of what happened in closed session to a district attorney or grand jury, to express an opinion concerning the legality of actions taken in closed session. That means if you have an opinion that it was wrong for the board to have taken action in closed session to approve the settlement, there's nothing that deprives you from stating that opinion. Remember the settlement that you approved that we report out? That's a lawful action that the board took. If you want to state an opinion that you don't agree with that action taken, we shouldn't have settled with that employee, that's your opinion. It shall not be deemed a violation for a person to disclose information that is not confidential information. So if there's information that comes into closed session that wasn't confidential, like perhaps in closed session you discussed the calendar and agreeing that we would have a holiday on the Friday before Easter, I don't know. That's not confidential information because that's going to be publicly known once that action is taken. To disclose information under the whistleblower statute, see Labor Code Section 1102. Whistleblower statutes are relevant with respect to someone asserting, an employee asserting that a law has been violated by some action of an agency. So there's whistleblower protections if someone discloses that. Hopefully in good faith, not in bad faith with any malice. Let me get to... prior to commencing an action for violation of the meeting, notice, and agenda provisions, right? The notice and agenda provisions only, right? Talking about violations there. The interested party or district attorney must demand in writing that the board cure and correct the alleged violation. Guess what? Even if we get it wrong, we have a chance to correct. That's what this means. Okay? Within 90 days of the action, or 30 days if the action was taken in open session in violation of the agenda agreements. That means if you took an action in closed session, there's 90 days for someone to request for you to cure and correct. But if you took action in open public session on an item that wasn't on the agenda, they've got 30 days to ask that you cure and correct. Okay? Sometimes you realize, oh my goodness, we voted to approve that field trip and that field trip wasn't properly on the agenda. If you notice it yourself, why not go ahead and cure and correct it? Add it to your next agenda and indicate, you know, we're going to take action on this item. We considered it at the last meeting, but since then we realized that that item was not on the agenda. We wish to cure and correct now. So you're being open, you're being transparent. Nothing precludes you from fixing it when you realize that you had a problem. Any civil action must be commenced within 15 days of the board's refusal to cure or expiration of 30 days after the man, whichever is earlier. So there's some quick timelines here. If someone thinks that you violated the Brown Act, they need to make a demand to cure and correct on the notice and agenda piece, right? If they don't, they've got a short time to file a lawsuit. A successful plaintiff is entitled to recover attorney's fees. That's provided by law. A court may order award of court costs, reasonable attorney's fees to a local agency in an action only where the defendant has prevailed in the final determination of such action and the court finds that the action was clearly frivolous and totally lacking in merit. That means if someone brings a frivolous action against the agency and we defend ourselves and it was just frivolous, we might be able to recover attorney's fees and costs. Okay, board, I tried to just kind of hit on some of the main pieces of the Brown Act that you're constantly dealing with. If you have any questions, we'll reserve those questions so I can move into the next presentation on parliamentary procedures. So that said, let me, if the board doesn't mind, may I sit for the next portion? It's been quite a long day. Or I don't know if the board would like to take a short recess. Thank you.
Because I'm sick.
I just use the example of just turning to Madam President and asking about, time certain at 9:30 to close the meeting. Board members, did you kind of understand what I was getting at when I was just simply asking Madam Chair about the timing for ending the meeting?
Well, because you're supposed to refer everything to the president, right?
Right. Yeah. And am I aware of any rule that says that's how I should be or have to act that way? No, it's just I've been to enough board meetings and I kind of see that that's how it happens and that's how it works. So parliamentary procedures are rules that have been developed and carried on by deliberative bodies for a long time. And the most commonly referred to rules of parliamentary procedures are Robert's Rules of Order. Okay? And in preparing for today's presentation, in conferring with Cliff Weiler, who comes to your board meetings, we realized there's nowhere in your board policies that we can find an obligation for the board to follow Robert's Rules of Order. Okay? What we do find is that the board president is charged with ensuring that parliamentary procedures are followed for your board meetings. So what does that mean? To us, that means you can follow whatever your common defined parliamentary procedures have been for your district. If there's a common defined set, then you follow those. The board can always choose to adopt a set of parliamentary procedures and follow them. And so what we've done is we've prepared an overview to review basic parliamentary procedures. Okay? That's the packet that's in front of you in the materials that we have. What I have tried to do for you is not to get into too many of the technical areas of Robert's Rules of Order for a variety of things. Robert Rules can be used for the types of meetings that are general assemblies or mass assemblies of delegates, and you'll hear people say, "I rise to a point of order." People actually standing up so they can be seen who's speaking on some of those issues. Good. In a smaller body like a school board, it's sort of easy to see who's asking questions, who wants to be recognized, who wants to be acknowledged. So some of the formality of Robert's Rules of Order doesn't need to be followed by you, but I think it does provide a structure, and what I've tried to do today is kind of put together a simple presentation or to have a discussion with you about rules of parliamentary procedure. And I think if we go through a discussion of the common terms and terminology, that'll help us understand what it is that we expect from our meetings. Madam President, thank you for sharing the cheat sheet on Robert's Rules. In fact, in preparing the materials today, I did reference this cheat sheet. But if you look at the cheat sheet, it's a chart, and you go, gosh, what is all this? It can be a little bit intimidating. And so it's good that you have it. Not all of these motions are motions that you use or commonly use. And so what I've tried to do in preparing the materials is try to give it more of a feel for the type of stuff that you as a board will need to follow. There's something very important that I think the board should recognize. Parliamentary procedures are followed for the purpose of having order, for the purpose of facilitating a meeting, and to being able to have a fair process. And if everyone agrees that the process is fair, then hopefully everyone at the end of the final decision will be in support of that decision. But at no point should anyone try to use the technicalities of rules of order to frustrate the process, to frustrate someone's participation. If someone's trying to make a motion and technically it's not the right time to make the motion, hopefully the board or colleagues on the board understand what the person is trying to accomplish, and through the assistance of the board president, or if there's an appointed parliamentarian, can assist that person in effectively participating in the meeting. But it also means that even Robert's Rules provides that if you're trying to advance a purpose for which the rules themselves are sort of frustrating the process, you can suspend your parliamentary procedures. And so it just takes a motion to suspend procedures, a second, and then there's a vote. And after that, then you can unravel the different issues that are going on. Sometimes it's, it's a good thing for us to review, and what I'd like to do is to ask you to turn to page 2. and sort of begin where I left off before the basic terminology, that last paragraph. Remember, if you have any questions about parliamentary procedure, do not hesitate to ask the chair. And you would do that by saying Mr. or Madam Chair or Madam President. I have a parliamentary question, and then you would state your question. If it's simply, is it appropriate for me to state a motion at this time to do this? Then the chairperson could let you know if it would be appropriate or not. And that's how you can work together as a board to kind of work through these procedures. All right, basic terminology and definitions. Quorum. I think most of us understand the quorum to mean the minimum number of board members required at a meeting to conduct business. For us, it's a minimum of 3 board members to conduct business. Majority. I want us to spend a little time talking about majority because majority can mean different things. First and foremost, I wanted to make sure that we understood that the Education Code requires that all board action be taken by majority unless specified to require a supermajority or a 2/3 vote. So generally speaking, you cannot pass any action or take any action at a board meeting with less than 3 votes in favor, okay? So if you happen to have a meeting where there is a quorum of 3 and there's a motion to approve an item and the vote is 2-1, the item does not pass. There isn't a majority to pass the item, okay? However, you have a quorum of 3 people and there's a motion to divide the question. Maybe the question is compound. I move to approve the setting of the Staff Appreciation Day for May 1st. Someone can make a motion, I move to divide the question. That means to divide the question. Well, what 2 parts? First part is to approve that we have a Staff Appreciation Day. Second part is to approve the date, okay? Now, in doing that, it should take just a majority of the 3 board members there present for how to take that question. That's not taking the final action on the item. Is that understood? So we have this basic concept that in terms of procedural issues in the meeting, when we refer to majority, it's a majority of those there. But to take that final action on the main motion, we're going to want to have at least 3 votes in favor of that proposition. The chair. The chair is a person presiding over the board meeting. This is typically the board president, who may be referred to as Mr. or Madam President, or Mr. or Madam Chair, Chairman, or Chairperson. It varies by region, it varies by preference, so whatever has been commonly used by this board in respectfully addressing the chairperson who runs the meeting, that's who you address your issues to. Always with that title, always with that respect. And also keep in mind that by using chair, if there's ever a meeting where your board president doesn't attend the meeting, is absent, and someone else takes on the meeting or the responsibility of the chair, you're already in the process of referring to the chair as the chair because they are chairing the meeting, not as Madam Clerk, because that person is the clerk of the board. So, the floor, what the floor means. The floor is having the right to speak or to take control of the ability to speak. It's once a person has been granted the right to speak. And understand that general rules of parliamentary procedures require that before anyone can speak, the chair must acknowledge them and grant them the floor. Someone who is speaking out of order without being recognized can be called out of order unless they are properly making a motion that could interrupt a speaker. And there are very few motions where you can interrupt. The perfect example of a motion where you can interrupt is where there is a point of parliamentary procedure perhaps there's been a violation of parliamentary procedure and you want that corrected, so you can interrupt the speaker at that time. But if you want to make a motion to take a short recess, you want to wait for the person to finish speaking and then make your motion to recess.
Case in point, if someone's talking, we're talking about something and they get off topic, you can say, I'll rise up to a point of order or to that they need to follow the agenda. I can do it, you can do it, she can do it.
Is that both in open and closed session, or is that only doing open session?
Okay. Your rules of parliamentary procedure should be followed anytime that you're meeting and discussing, be it in open session or closed session. I can tell you that the practice seems to be that it is more relaxed in closed session, and sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes that's not a good thing. So choose and understand when your board wishes to adhere to those standards. My recommendation would be you always should follow that process if that's the process you're agreeing to, and that you not follow that when there has been a conscious decision by the board to suspend those rules. Okay. If you go into closed session and the first thing you do in closed session is motion to suspend the rules, that's the first thing you do. Okay, we suspend the rules and then we have more of a cafecito type of discussion in closed session. That would be all right. But typically, I would recommend that if you do suspend it, that when you do come to a final call for the vote in closed session, that you do follow the formal motion procedures for doing that. But discussion could be more free-flowing and open in closed session. Okay. Precedence. Precedence refers to the rank of motions in the order of precedent. Generally speaking, a motion of high precedence may be made while a motion of lower precedence is pending. That means that there's a value to certain motions. Okay. What I'd like to share with you now is if you turn to the last page, ranking of parliamentary motions. This list is comprised based on Robert's Rules of Order and what they typically recognize as the order of preference. There's a few other motions in here that may be missing. It's not a complete or exhaustive list. I do want to share with you that if you look about a third of the way down, it says limit/extend limits of debate. Those are two separate types of motions. One is to limit the debate. The other is a motion to extend the debate, but they have a same rank. Okay. If you look a little further down, the next third, main motion / discharge a committee / rescind / motion to amend something. Those are motions of a similar rank. That's not one motion. So in terms of ranking, you would rank those at the same level. So when looking at the motions, some motions have higher rank, which you can bring up a higher rank motion when a lower rank motion is pending, not the other way around. Okay. Now, this is where it starts to get technical, and I'm saying, okay, where am I going? Okay, I don't want to lose you. Just understand that there's some priority for motions. Don't worry about learning them. Don't worry about memorizing them. It comes with practice, okay? And you don't always encounter these motions in your meeting, but just understand that there's a certain hierarchy. The next term, yield. A motion of low precedence yields to one of higher precedence. Okay? And so if in the middle of the meeting someone is making a motion of a lower precedence to over a motion of higher precedence, someone can ask for a point of order. The Madam Chairperson, if it's not apparent to the chair, may ask, state your point. The motion must yield to the previous motion. Okay, and then you'll figure that out during the meeting. Pending. What does pending mean? There's a couple uses of the word pending. So when a motion is made and the chair has stated the question, that is, I move to approve the field trip to the zoo. That's my motion. Is there a second? Right? Someone seconds. Then the chair should say, It has been moved and seconded that we approve the field trip to the zoo. At that point, the motion is considered pending. Once the chair has stated what the question is, right? The question means the motion that we are considering, the action that we are considering, then that motion is pending until it's disposed. Disposed of means either acted on or continued, deferred, referred, you know. So if it's not finally voted on, then it's still pending. Now, there could be a second motion made after that first motion made, and that next motion, that second motion, would then become the immediately pending motion. So you would have a pending motion, which is the trip to the zoo, and if there's a second motion, that second motion would be the immediately pending motion. Okay. Next, the question. That means the immediately pending motion is often referred to as the question. So if you've got the pending motion that was the original question, and there's a subsequent or secondary motion that is made, that secondary motion now becomes the question. So if someone says call the question, that's a term that you might have heard, means let's call for the vote. It's calling the vote on the immediately preceding motion.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
May I ask a question?
Okay.
Yeah, I follow. Can you give us an example? So let's say somebody got a motion and somebody seconded to approve the trip to the zoo. So can you give us an example on what would be a second motion?
Okay. So the motion is move to approve the trip to the zoo on May 1st.
Okay.
Okay? That's the question. Discussion or debate, we'll get into those terms, begins.
Is that before or after the second?
Okay, this is before. The chair has just said, it has been moved and seconded that we approve a field trip to the zoo on May 1st. Discussion. Well, let's say it's happening. Then someone says, I move to divide the question, because we're going to separate the question. Do we approve the trip? Do we approve the date? Okay. Now that dividing the question becomes a secondary motion.
Doesn't
Right.
it require a second?
It would. I'm kind of moving forward to give the example. Okay. So that second question to divide, right? It's been moved. Is there a second? Second. Okay. Now that's not debatable. It's not a debatable motion, and your chart here is great because it tells you what requires a second and what requires a debate. I don't want to get into too many of those technical issues. And then you would call the question. The question is, do we divide the issue? Okay. Originally, the question was, do we approve the trip to the zoo? But that's no longer the question when there's another motion pending. So you work backwards. First motion, second motion. First you resolve the second, then you go back to the first. So when someone if there's that secondary motion and they call the question, they want that resolved. It's that most immediately pending motion. Okay.
Let me interject something right here, or maybe ask for clarification. We've had a couple of situations where we have a motion and a second, and then we have a second motion tossed out. In other words, raised by a member, and so that will essentially be an amendment. And so what I've done in the past is say, we already have a motion on the floor. Or if you are wanting to ask for, to amend that and change that first motion, then I ask the person who made the motion, would you like to withdraw your motion and accept the amendment? So that there's not a whole lot of back and forth. And if the person who made the motion accepts the amendment and so does the second, then we move forward from there. Is that?
Okay.
That's.
And let me tell you,
I think it cuts to the chase.
It cuts to the chase. It's an efficient way of dealing with it. If you're following the technical Roberts rules, someone doesn't have to agree to amend the motion.
Right.
You know, you're asking me to withdraw my motion and amend it? No. I want us to go to the zoo on May 1st.
And that's their,
That's the motion. And okay, fine. I move to amend. And so now you have to vote on the motion to amend before you go back to the main motion.
right. But if they're amenable to it, it's okay.
If they're amenable to it, yeah, it's okay.
Okay.
And what happens sometimes is the rules are lax, and that's one of the things I want us to understand. Don't feel frustrated with all the technicalities here, because you may find a way to get to what you're doing in a more efficient way. And if someone's willing to accept I accept it. The other way it's sometimes presented is, Madam Chair, I wonder if my colleague would accept a friendly motion, or a friendly amendment to his motion. What would be then the chair would say, well, what would be your amendment? That instead of May 1st, we do it on May 10th? Yeah, Mother's Day? You know, and then the person says, no, I won't accept that amendment. I've got plans on the 10th, or whatever. But sometimes you do it that way so that it's a certain level of courtesy. We understand where you're coming from, so be it. All right. We went over question. Next is the term entertain. The chair entertains a motion when he or she suspects or allows it to be brought before the board. On occasion, when the chair sees the need for a particular motion to be made, she may state that she will entertain a particular motion. So for example, if everyone looks like they could use a break, the chair can suggest that I will entertain a motion to recess for 10 minutes. And all someone has to say is so moved. Then second, anyone opposed? We're at a recess. So that's a different type of vote. We don't have to take an official vote right then and there, but usually by consensus, there's not a problem. So that's how a motion can be entertained. If a member of the public comes and places an item on the agenda that was not part of the administration, it was not part of the board's desire to place that item on the agenda, the board president may, on those occasions, have to request that someone place that motion or make that motion. So it's a member of the public who wants to extend library hours in the afternoon. We're to item G on the agenda. The chair will entertain a motion to approve extending the library hours. No motion. The item dies for failure of a motion. Move on. So I'm giving you some examples of how that may happen. Out of order, that's just a statement used when motions, debate, or actions on items are not allowed under the rules of a given situation or out of order. If the board has certain rules about directing or communicating with each other, and during a debate or discussion, someone's not adhering to those rules, the board could rule someone out of order for not following the board's procedures for courteous treatment of board members during a board meeting or something. I know that's a question that you brought forward before, but again, some of the other things are that frequently requests and items have to be directed to the board president. So if a speaker, meaning one of the board members, is then beginning to attack personally or direct their comments directly at another member, the chair can always rule them out of order because they must restrain their comments to presenting to the board and not directing those comments individually at anyone.
If a board member, then I'm saying it's extremely out of order, making comments not to the public but towards another. As you say, this is our meeting,
Yeah.
right? So we are discussing. So let's say, it's an example, it's never going to happen. I am at it with the president. Could she remove me from the meeting?
You as an elected official, no.
No.
But what may happen is a request could be made by one of the other board members that we recess. It's one of the most unusual circumstances under that where it's just out of control, that you could make a motion to adjourn the meeting. And I say that because Robert's Rules says you can make a motion to adjourn the meeting essentially at any time. But again, remember that our board agendas are set, and our time for adjourn is actually an action item on our agenda. So we have to cover that as part of our business. So we would never suggest to you to adjourn a meeting unless it's just an extreme circumstance. You have the public is ripping at the seams. Board members are out of control. It's, way late into the evening. You may choose not to adjourn, but to recess and reset the meeting for another day.
So are you saying that the rules for removal of a disruptive person apply to the public but not to the board?
That would be my sense, because I think, and I would have to research that more.
Can you research
Yeah,
that?
more specifically for you. Certainly with respect to the public, yes. But again, the elected officials are the ones who have been elected to carry out the duty, and they've been lawfully placed on that board to do the board's will. So to allow you to remove someone would mean you could effectively disenfranchise the public who elected for that public official. It would be a very extreme situation. I certainly wouldn't advise a board to do that, because there are other ways of dealing with it, which is maybe people just need to take a time out and just let's recess, take a 10-15 minute recess, and the chair may do it just for the purpose of, let me go and talk to that board member, see if I can get that board member to reconsider how they're approaching this decision.
Thank you.
Can a chair call for a recess at any time?
I believe so. I just don't know that you can interrupt for a recess. But see, now we're getting
Yes.
to some of, to take a break. Okay, if you look on page 1, it refers to section 20, it's the second one. A motion to take a break. I move to recess. Can you interrupt? No. That means if someone's speaking, you can't interrupt. You have to wait for that person to finish speaking. Does it require a second? Yes. Can you debate it? No. You're just going to put it up to a question. Okay? Can that be amended? Yes. If you ask for a recess of 5 minutes, I move to amend to make it 10 minutes. A vote, it's a majority. So it's a majority of those board members who are there present to take that recess. Okay? Right. And again, this is for procedures for your meetings, not for an actual action item of business. Okay? All right. Dilatory. Dilatory is a term used to refer to certain motions that are made or intended to disrupt or impede the business. So if someone is going to frustrate your meeting, they may want to make a motion. I move to extend the debate. And if after every item that comes up, that's their motion. I move to extend debate. I move to extend debate. The only reason they're doing it is now just to throw motions out there to frustrate the meeting. That person may be ruled out of order by the chair.
Kind of like a filibuster,
Yeah, exactly.
but on a board level.
And so when we get into the basic framework, there's something interesting about the procedures that I don't know that you've taken any firm stance on putting time limits on your own board members. For
We've
discussion.
implemented through the majority of the board when we had changeover.
Okay.
We implemented a structure, if you will, of how the board addresses items.
Okay.
We open it up and then call for, the motion in a second, and then we start discussion from the left to the right,
Okay.
reserving myself for the
For
last.
the last. Okay.
And try to go at least, have speak twice to it.
Oh, but very
However,
good.
the only thing that I did have a question about is, in our board bylaws, it stipulates that board members have 3 minutes to speak.
Okay.
Okay, so my question is this: if you've got an item, or whatever the motion that you have, an item, so the total amount for the board member is to speak 3 minutes total, so they can choose. In my interpretation, but I haven't applied it because I wanted clarity. My interpretation is that they would be able to speak twice to the issue, but they have a total amount of 3 minutes to speak to it, and it would be their choice to use the 3 minutes the first time they speak, or speak a minute and a half, or leave it to the next round.
Okay.
So, what is or is it three each time they speak 3 minutes?
The typically, what I have found is that for each round, there's a specified amount of time.
That's correct.
And so you could have a rule that for the first round of speaking, it's 3 minutes. For the second round of speaking is also 3 minutes. What I have found, for example, in the Roberts Rules and other groups that follow Roberts Rules, the time is 10 minutes. I've also found that the first round may be 10 minutes, with the second round decreased to 5 minutes, because now you're trying to hone in on what the issue is. I haven't seen your bylaws, the ones that you're referring to. I'd be more than happy to review those and look at those. But if it needs clarity, you should specify a member shall receive only a total of 3 minutes, which they can distribute between comments in the first round.
Break it down like that.
Right, and to break it down. Otherwise, you're asking this question, and it's whatever process you wish to follow. Just make sure it's specific and it's consistent. If you're going to give everyone 2 opportunities to speak, you could simply say everyone has 2 3-minute opportunities to speak. If someone says, okay, that means I have 6 minutes, so I'm going to wait till the second time to speak. No, that doesn't work either. So just whatever you're going to do, if you're going to define your own rules of procedure, then let's make sure your rules of procedure are sufficiently clear.
Okay.
Let me finish these 2 terms, and then we'll get into the framework, and then maybe you'll find that by using some of this framework, you can incorporate the framework into what you want. So recess just simply means a recess is a break in the meeting. It doesn't mean the meeting is over, it just means a break in the meeting. Adjournment means adjournment and terminating the meeting. That means all the action, for our purposes, we should believe that all the action of that meeting has been discussed, dealt with, or we choose not to deal with any of those issues again. A recess means that if we're in the middle of this meeting and we still have business we need to handle, and we want to pick this up, you should just refer to it as we are recessing until next Monday and reconvene the meeting at that time. Okay? But if you're going to recess for that length of time, you should specify the date and the time when you're going to reconvene. Okay? So, page 4. I got a little cute here with the heading action. It's a motion's final destination, right? The motion, once it's made, it wants to get to become action. And so here's the basic framework. The business of the board is usually conducted through the use of motions, and those are proposals for action. There are different kinds of motions to approve a course of action, to approve a contract, a motion to adjourn, to recess, a motion to limit debate. Motions can be far-reaching, such as to postpone the main motion indefinitely, which kills the main motion, or very narrow in the scope, such as to divide the question. That's very narrow, which permits actions on individual parts of a motion before approving the motion as a whole. So a motion is first made and seconded.